This is House Planning Help episode 392. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build or retrofit. I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up in this session, my guest is Marion Baeli, architect and author of Residential Retrofit, which has been expanded and updated for its second edition. So it focused on 20 case studies, which is why it's interesting to reflect on them again today. This is over a decade since the book was released. So did it all work? And that's the question that I'm hoping to answer. Can we highlight what's the difference between good and bad retrofit? We often start the podcast by mentioning a resource. We're going to mention an event today, which is the Passive House Open Days. If you haven't heard of this before, well, it's great for quite a few reasons. Let's start with a basic one, which is if you plan to build a house or to retrofit an existing property, then there is no better way to get out there and experience some finished projects. Meet homeowners, sometimes the builders there as well. That could be a good contact. The other side is, of course, people go on about Passive House and they say why it feels different and they explain the physics behind it. It's not quite the same as walking in through the door, then you can just make up your own mind. So I would encourage you to take advantage of these events twice yearly, once to demonstrate summer comfort and the other to demonstrate how warm it is in the winter. And we must say a big thank you to everyone who hosts one of these events, because there's quite a lot involved in it. You've got to tidy up the house, or you probably will want to tidy up the house, and then you'll want to provide refreshments. You might even bake something. You start to get carried away, don't you? And then you've got all the questions coming at you from all angles. But it is so useful, particularly those regulars who do it every single time. I've been watching, I've been impressed. I salute you. So the Passive House Open Days, that's what you need to search for. We'll put a link in the show notes so that you can find it. Let's get to our featured interview with Marion Baeli, author of Residential Retrofit. So 20 case studies in that original book. Have they stood the test of time? It's a question we'll be asking. I started, though, by asking Marion to introduce herself and tell me a little bit about her background.
I'm Marion Baeli. I'm a French architect originally, but I have been in the UK for 23 years. I decided to retrain halfway through my career about 15 years ago in sustainability, and I took a master's degree in sustainable architecture and design. And that was really the fundamental shift in everything that I've done in my career, as I found out about Passive House during my course. And that was really the sort of structure that I needed to give me a really robust roadmap for changing everything that I was doing and the way that I was approaching architecture. And so from then on, I never looked back, and I've been trying to implement Passive House, low energy design, and now obviously with the added aspect of embodied carbon and circularity, which is becoming the new big challenge for us.
And I think we'll actually bring up your book, Residential Retrofit, early on, because there's a reason for this. So it's a few years ago that you wrote it. Why did you put it together?
Well, in fact, while I was doing the master's degree, this competition for Retrofit for the Future came about from the government. So an amazing initiative where the government decided to invest close to £15 million to push the industry to test our ability to reduce carbon emission by 80% in the housing sector. So I think this is one of the major milestone for retrofit in the UK. We ended up with 100 case studies of homes that had tested techniques and various approaches on all sorts of archetypes throughout the UK. And I won a contract to do a Victorian retrofit for social housing Octavia in Holland Park. And we managed to certify it to Passive House. It was a full Passive House at the time, because NFIT did not yet exist. And that really made me think we need to talk about these projects. At the time, as often with publicly funded research, there is no budget for marketing and dissemination of the information in a really significant way. There's definitely been a really good report but they were not able, for GDPR reasons, to identify specific houses in the case studies that they reported back on. So I decided to take it upon myself to team up with the RBA and the Institute of Sustainability at the time to produce a book that would take 20 case studies throughout the UK, representing all the construction types and focusing also a little over a third of the book on pre-1919, so solid wall construction. My intention was really, we need to talk about this program. We need to give feedback from experience about what has worked, how have we approached different construction, and there's loads of examples of even similar Victorian buildings that have approached a retrofit in various ways. So it was really to try to disseminate that knowledge, empower and inspire others to have similar approaches.
And this was early days, so what were the key takeaways?
So I guess the takeaway from this experience at the time was really about testing the technologies that we knew had worked in other countries, but not yet in the UK. So MVHR was very new and nobody knew if it would work, if it would last, etc. Obviously, we heard from other countries that, it's working elsewhere, but there was still a little bit of a kind of curiosity around it at the time. There was also a lot of curiosity about the building fabric, the effort that you need to put in to achieve energy efficiency as passive house level, for example, and the importance of airtightness and thermal bridges. And everybody was looking at it thinking, my God, this is like rocket science. How on earth are we going to do this? And what's really interesting is to look at it 10, 15 years later and saying, well, actually now airtightness and MVHR is part of everybody's daily workload, and we've completely overcome it. So it's interesting to see that at the time we had a bit of a skepticism about the approach, and now we've totally embraced it. But I think this exercise, this funding exercise with Retrofit for the Future, was really a good kickstart at inspiring and enabling people to test techniques that they perhaps would have not tried just yet at the time.
So what's happened now you've revised it? What has changed?
So with my very good friend Julie Godefroy at CIBSI, we teamed up to do this research of looking at these buildings 10 years after. So we've looked at 10 projects that had been retrofitted 10 years ago to try to see if there are lessons that we could learn both from the current performance of these buildings, but also about the building performance evaluation techniques. And so it was really about basically breaking down all the measures, saying, okay, have the services worked, have the windows work, has the fabric work, are the material in still good condition, are the occupant still happy or happier maybe? Are the energy bill savings that we advertised at the time, are they still happening 10 years on? Is the airtightness still there? All these aspects that we had no industry feedback on, because it's very difficult, one, to do a retrofit, but then to go back 10 years later and do this kind of in-depth analysis is quite unique. So this CIBSI collaboration really enabled us to get some conclusions about what are the key successes of a retrofit.
And what building performance evaluation did you do?
So we had to create our own approach. And this is a key question, and I'm very glad that you're asking this, is because I think as an industry, if we want to really know how a building performs, we need to align a building performance evaluation strategy for everybody to be able to recognize, the method of evaluating the performance of
Not
building.
apples and oranges.
That's right. And I think we need to be able to, yes, because if you compare somebody's finding on their performance to somebody else's that has used completely different ways of measuring the performance, then you won't be able to compare. So we looked at energy use intensity metrics. Curiously, one of the key aspects also of building performance evaluation is getting the energy bills to be able to understand the the energy consumed by the household. And it sounds very easy, but actually it's very difficult. And sometimes the basics, our industry can be incredibly sophisticated, but sometimes when you do this sort of studies, you realize how basic and completely unpractical our systems are. And we could not get an energy bill for 2 properties for various reasons. One had 2 electric meter installed, one new, one old, and they all had not been taken out, but there was some confusion over which one was measuring what. Is incredibly difficult, and the tenant didn't realize had a £4,000 bill in arrear because she never received her bills because of these 2 meter issue. So it was just, we unpicked quite a few problems throughout this. And another tenant just was not able to get her bill at all because of a reference in the billing system, etc. So sometimes just getting the very basics is actually not as easy as we can think. Not to forget this aspect of research. Nevertheless, we managed to get a good data on energy demand and therefore EUI. So we've compared that, and EUI is a good metric because the industry has really embraced it now, and we can compare with other building on a per meter square basis.
Can you just explain what the energy use intensity actually is in basic terms?
So the energy use intensity, in effect, is the energy that comes into your house through the meter, and that's your actual energy that is used to operate the building. You are relating it to the square meterage of your property, so it's per meter square and per year, so that we can compare a smaller house with a bigger house and then be able to have a comparable metric here is really important.
Did you get a chance to go back and check airtightness as well?
Yes, so we had the luxury of being able to do 2 tests for each of the houses. One is the pulse test and one is the blower door test. Most people will be more familiar with the blower door test. And we used both systems in each of the houses, and we did both tests the same day. As we know, the airtightness is could be impacted by the atmosphere outside the building, wind, and etc. So it was good to be able to do the 2 tests at once to be able to compare. Also, one of the key difference between pulse and the blower door test. Pulse, you test the entire fabric and it gives you a good number. You also test the front door, which in a blower door test, you can't test the front door because that's where your fan is. And so if there is any issues with the seals of the front door, you won't capture that with a blower door test, unless you move the...
Put it in a window.
You put it in a window, etc. So that's the good side of the pulse test. The downside of the pulse test is you can't track the leak. So if you identify that the house is actually quite leaky and there's some issues somewhere, you can't go around with a smoke gun and follow the smoke into the air path through the fabric, which is what you can do with the blower door test. So depending on what you're looking for and your confidence in the airtightness of the property you're testing, you might prefer to go for one or the other, or you could do a pulse test very quickly for lots of properties, and then if you see there is an issue, then you can do a blower door test to find out where the issues are. Just 2 differences, but both are recognized by building regs, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to test it, because there hadn't been extensive research about comparing the 2 together on similar properties at the same time.
And any other metrics in your building performance evaluation?
Yes, so we also collaborated with the Centre for Moisture in Buildings, UK Centre for Moisture in Building, and UCL with Valentina. And we looked at the ambient moisture, but also the moisture in the fabric. We didn't do it for all the houses, but a selection of houses where we looked at the moisture in vented cavity. That was such a big topic 15 years ago about, the joist potentially rotting if we were leaving it in the external wall when we insulate internally. So the issue is that you have an existing brick wall, you have a cavity, and then your layer of insulation. But the joist goes through the insulation, the air gap, and rests in the brick wall. So we wanted to know 10 years on, is there issues where the joist stand? Is there significant moisture in that cavity? So we were able to take measurements on the cavity. which was great. And we found out that actually the cavities we tested, it's not necessarily representative of everywhere, of course, but the cavity we tested were fine. We did not find any excessive moisture. On the joist end, we're not able to measure precisely because we would have had to carry out some pretty drastic destructive access. So that is always the limits of a building performance evaluation, is that, how much you can access the fabric behind the plasterboard and various layers. So there is still an area of uncertainty, but no floors have collapsed. We haven't seen anything like that. But we have done some WUFI modeling as part of the study as well, which is all available in this Retrofit Revisit report. It's also highly dependent on the exposure to driving rain, the climate of that particular year, whether the bricks are going to be saturated with water more so than other years. We know that the climate is changing. We might have more extreme downpours. So what does that mean? Perhaps this is something that we didn't really look at 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And the other aspect is the porosity of the brick. So we have done some cast and tube tests when we did the WUFI analysis on a couple properties, but it's not representative of every house across the UK either. One of the aim is for all these lessons to be informing retrofit throughout the UK and be replicable. But a retrofit is always a prototype because you never have two houses exactly in the same environment, same location, same orientation, with exactly the same bricks and exactly the same mortar, etc. So there is so many variables to consider. But what we're trying to give is lessons learned from a selection of case studies that can inform if we had some major failure. I think that we would have been able to feed that back as to be avoided. But we didn't have on the joist end issue any major realization of failure for the case studies that we looked at.
So the big question about the performance gap on these metrics and maybe any others that you've included, what happened?
What happened? So I guess everybody wants to know. Okay, so one thing to really set the scene here, all the people involved in this project were really focused on performance and quality. So they were all very informed. Everybody did, thermal bridging calcs, airtightness strategies, etc. So it's not necessarily representative of the whole UK market of retrofit. This is experts putting their best effort trying to achieve an outstanding retrofit. Therefore, the strategy for airtightness, for insulation, for thermal bridging, etc., has been very robust. And what we found 10 years later is actually that robustness is still there. So that is the key finding, is that we haven't seen airtightness tape peel away or insulation boards collapsing or layers, etc., or major failures. And that is because a great deal of attention had been put at the start. And if I can just, say as a key takeaway is just spend some time to plan your retrofit properly and bring some experts and make sure that, you're paying attention to every detail throughout the fabric that you're looking to retrofit. Nevertheless, there's a couple of things that I'd like to point out in the areas that need attention. So one is we did have one case of external insulation, plastic base insulation, that slightly deformed. So it collapsed a little bit. It's an external wall that was heavily exposed to the sun. And so we think that they've started to bow because of the solar exposure. So that probably would not be recommended as something to replicate, but that's a key lesson. So maybe something more like a rock wool or insulated plaster or something a little bit more forgiving would take the sun solar exposure better. One of the biggest lessons learned is maintenance of your building fabric. And that is nothing to do with deep retrofit or retrofit necessarily. It's just good practice of maintaining your gutters. For example, we had a house that had a leaky gutter on the brick wall for 10 years, and you could see that all of the bricks further down below saturated with water, and with the added consequence of having a cement mortar, the bricks started to spoil and fragment. And there's also quite a lot of moss growing on the facade. You'll see it also in the Retrofit Revisit report. So maintaining your fabric is definitely important. We're not certain that has affected the performance of the building, because in that particular house we had 300 mil of sheep's wool insulation, and we've tested the insulation and it didn't seem to be affected by the moisture, but the brick is definitely affected. So that means that you're damaging your building fabric. And the other maybe worth mentioning lesson that we found during this exercise is the window and door seals. So the airtightness has mostly maintained, but slightly worsened, and everywhere was the same issue: gaskets for windows and doors. And so these, after 10 or 15 years, will start to degrade and lose in their ability to keep their house airtight. So that's something that I have challenged the window manufacturers to address.
Can we replace these easily?
So that is the key issue. And I think we need to challenge the manufacturers a little bit more in offering that circularity, offering that repair. We're not mature enough in the industry in circularity and the repair of all our elements. And we had the case of one house where the air leakage was terrible in one of the French door going to the outside, and the client wanted to replace it because they thought it's just not working, it's just old and, needs to be thrown in the bin. But actually looking at it a bit closer, we managed to bring somebody in to just readjust the hinges and the gaskets, and it was fine, and it performed absolutely fine. It was just, it needed a little bit of love and care.
Well, tell me who that person is, because I have a French door which has needed adjusting for ages, and trying to find the right person, you get very nervous. You want someone who knows what they're doing, and a window installer who comes out to make adjustments to someone else's installation. Very difficult to find.
Yeah. So my first point of call would always be the original manufacturer of the window or door that you're looking at. Obviously, you might not know if there isn't a label on it. But if you do know, go back to them and challenge them, like we're challenging bigger manufacturer of curtain walling, for the glass offices. And we're asking them now to come back and say, hey, look at your glass and your system. Can you take it back, recycle, bring it back in, or regasket? And that is happening in the commercial industry. So I think we need to just do the same in the domestic sector. It definitely happens for PVC windows, because PVC windows are terrible. They're full of little bits and metal brackets, etc., that fell all of the time. That's the nightmare of all social housing sector maintenance teams. So they exist, but they also are, otherwise a good joiner should be able to help you out with your door, for sure.
Let's move on a little bit, because we've got some other things to talk about here. So that all seems pretty positive. We've got some lessons. But recently, and we don't even need to name it, there's been a government scheme which has completely failed in trying to improve performance in buildings. So if you're saying that this is successful and then that's not so successful, what is the difference and what should we watch out for?
So typically the key difference, and I'm on the advisory panel for DESNES on this issue, as you know, the reason for the failure is, as usual, a sort of elemental approach. You just take one problem and you don't consider the system around it and the way that it works, especially, and I keep raising it, the holistic approach of a retrofit. You can't really do a retrofit by looking at just one thing, like in this particular case, the insulation layer. If you don't address the moisture, the ventilation system, the way that the house previously performed and behaved, especially in moisture terms, we are going to have issues like the ones that have been happening with the scheme. And that's the typical of lack of training, lack of investment in the people who are doing these retrofits. What really breaks my heart is when I see photographs of these poor retrofits, I can see that somebody has spent a lot of time trying to make it as best as they could with the information that they had at the time. So I wouldn't blame the people who installed it. I would blame the people who've briefed them and given them the scope of work to install these insulation layers without thinking of the rest. So I'm hoping that now, having moved on quite a few years from this event, we have a bit more of a holistic approach, in particular with a retrofit coordinator course in past 2035. This would not happen again, but we just need to make sure that we are considering moisture, ventilation and insulation and airtightness and thermal bridges in a comprehensive, holistic way from the start for all retrofit. This is really the key to not replicating what's happened in the past.
Do you think some of the failure comes down to money, that it's really difficult to get the finances to stack up, and most development is all about, well, I've got to see the value in the property at the end, and you don't see the value. You see the comfort and the health and all those nice things if you get it right, but sometimes you just don't have the money to do a good job.
Yeah, I mean, lots to say about this, but to some extent, we need to question, what is it that we're trying to achieve here? Why are we doing the retrofits at all? If it's for climate change, then we need to accept that this is not a return on investment. It's a mandatory measure that is forced upon our generation. Once you have retrofitted these homes, your children will benefit from it, and the children of your children. It's a one in a generation. Unfortunately, it's fallen on our shoulders, and we have to bear the cost of it. But this is a cost that is inevitable. So I think, first of all, we need to recognize this. It's a one-off. Second of all, I often say to people, when you buy a car that is, maybe 15-year-old, you're not going to say, oh, I'm just going to carry on driving it with 3 wheels or something. You're going to maintain it, change the wheels and change something inside, or change the engine, or whichever. You're going to do something. Why are we approaching our houses in any different way to that? Why are we saying, I don't want to replace my single glazed windows, they've been there forever? Okay, maybe for comfort people would do that. But, with the insulation, people feel that is too much hard work. But we need to see it as being a resilient and robust property for the future, and understand it as a key maintenance and improvement and investment in the property to be a good quality, robust property in the future. On a return on investment, I mean, this is a classic that's been going on forever. We never really say to people, well, your SUV car, what's the return on investment in this? Cars are 40% more expensive than they used to be, and everybody's still carrying on buying car. But in a house, if you say, well, add an extra 5% on your project to put some insulation in your property, and people say, oh, what's the return on investment? I can't possibly do this. So I think there is an unfair judgment on the retrofit and the housing sector on this expectation of return on investment. And it's probably because, especially in the UK maybe, we have considered that properties are a financial investment. But they are not. They are a habitat for human being to feel comfortable in. And this is what we really need to focus on and remember.
And it's a little bit unfair as well that value changes with where you are. So that can make a big difference if you're in the middle of nowhere or somewhere with a very low property value anyway. Whereas in London or whatever, you might get your money back anyway just from inflation.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is what are the reasons why you would want to do a retrofit? If it's for comfort, then you don't really mind where it is because you're not looking for the value. But if you want to get a return on your money, then obviously location is a significant factor in that aspect. But in the light of what you were mentioning about the cost of having to retrofit, and when you do it badly, you have to pay a lot more. I mean, look at the cost that it's costing the government to repair the mistake that they've done in the past. So I think we need to make sure that when we invest well for the long term.
So what would have been a better strategy then at that time if they wanted to offer that encouragement?
Sometimes people have really good intentions, say, oh, let's retrofit, it's really the right thing to do. I can totally understand that. But they will cut corners and go to the fastest, cheapest route because they want to be impactful very quickly. Sometimes you just need to step back, get your advice from all the top experts and say, what do you think is really good? And I can absolutely guarantee you that at the time, no expert would have recommended to do what they've done. So I think, there's been some shortcutting here for efficiency, for impact, and for cost effectiveness. And that has been the problem.
I think we'll leave that one there. But what's quite interesting is where we're recording this interview now is your own house. And you didn't immediately have funds available for a full retrofit, did you?
So, we had to do with what we had at the time. And we had to pace our retrofit. So our retrofit is a step-by-step retrofit where we just spend a bit of money whenever we could. But what's really important when you have this approach to a retrofit is that you plan it from the start. You plan the outcome, the final outcome. Where is it that you want to go? So that for each measure that you're implementing, you know how it will interface with the following on measure. So in the case of our house, we decided to, perhaps counterintuitively for a lot of people, not touch the facade at all in the first instance, because we have a 1960s house and it's very easy to access the facades. However, changing the layouts inside the building once you've moved in is very difficult. So we decided to do all the changes that are internal to the house as a step one. So insulating the ground floor, creating a little roof extension, insulating the party walls and making all the layout changes that we wanted to make. And then after having moved in and lived in our newly laid out house, we were able to actually take down the facades, which were brick and block resting on concrete beams. So the concrete beam is retained, but the brick and block has been taken out, crushed and transformed into a landscape in our rear garden. Bit of circularity there. And then we reconstructed a super insulated timber frame wall on top of the concrete beam and install new triple glazed windows. And that was fairly easy to actually do later on. It was a little odd sometimes to be in our bedrooms in the middle of the night with a sheet of plastic as a facade, but nobody,
knocked on the door.
No,
there's no door.
Yeah, it was like camping in your own house. It was quite interesting.
So your property is east-west facing. So were you ever tempted to change the actual visual appearance of it? I know you're in a line of terraces, so but what did that mean for glazing, for example?
So we're in a row of terraces of 6 identical homes. And for me, I didn't want to say, hey, we are the funky passive house, super low energy. We're really different and we're going to do some funky stuff. I wanted it to look exactly the same after the retrofit than before, in respect for the terrace. That was my take of it. So we have actually taken down the timber cladding on the facade. So it's kind of white painted timber boards. We sanded them back, replaned them, repainted them, and put them back on a new super insulated wall. And the windows are triple glazed windows with a white frame which match the other frame. So the window arrangement is slightly different to the others because we went for larger format and not the usual PVC windows with lots of little opening panels. So we have one big opening panel. It fits in and it respects the local environment. We're in a 1960s estate that has its own character, and we didn't want to disrupt that.
And also, as part of the remodel, you've brought a lot more light into the property, not necessarily on the east-west elevations, because that probably had good light already, but in the kitchen.
Yes, that's right. So our house is about 95, 97 square meters, not a huge house, but it's quite long. It's 10 meter long by 5 meter wide footprint. And it means that the area at the center of the house is actually quite dark. And this is how we found the house when we moved in. So we decided to create an open plan on the ground floor, but also to bring some daylight to the ground floor. So we created 2 sort of light wells, one above the stair and one above the kitchen worktop all the way through the roof. That brings daylight throughout the year in the center of the floor plate. And that was really important for us to always feel in tune with the external environment. Having this daylight flooding into all areas of the house is something that we wanted to achieve, and I think that's been pretty successful.
And tell us a bit more about the ventilation, at what stage that went in. Was that very early on in the process?
So we definitely, one of the key aspects of a retrofit, of a good retrofit, is to plan the ductwork route. This is the most difficult one in a retrofit. It's not always where you want it to be, etc. But we managed to put all the ductwork in the first phase. We couldn't afford the MVHR at first, but it was okay because we hadn't touched the very leaky PVC windows. So we had a lot of air coming in. So that was okay. But as soon as we put the windows and closed the facade properly and achieved our air tightness, so we're at air tightness of 0.56, I think, something like that. So we're pretty good here. But we immediately felt the humidity in the house and the need to switch on the MVHR. So that is absolutely fundamental, and you can see the impact that an MVHR has on an indoor comfort. It really is your lungs. And we had a case, in fact, in the Retrofit Revisit where 2 weeks before the experiment, I went and visited the house. And as soon as I opened the front door, I felt a huge amount of humidity in the air. And I was like, what is going on? What's happened? And I knew there was something wrong. And the MVHR had stopped working because one of the fan was broken. So we had to immediately, at great speed, try to replace the fan, which was actually, to be honest, a very small exercise. It wasn't a complicated exercise to do. It was just taking 1 hour, putting it back in. But it just proven to us again how much it deals with moisture content into your indoor environment, and hence all the failures that we've seen in projects that have not addressed the ventilation.
Well, I think it's particularly concerning when perhaps the occupant doesn't understand what the ventilation system does, which sounds like a stupid thing to say, but if it goes wrong, I'll just leave it switched off. And then that's no doubt where the failures turn into more serious things, because it's probably even worse than a leaky house.
Yes. We had also another case where a tenant called us and said, I've got water on my windows inside the house. The windows must be failing. There's something that's not working with the windows, not realizing that it was actually humidity in the air that was condensating on the windows. And they had a power cut and the MVHR had switched off and they didn't realize it. And that was the solution. But that particular person also was suffering of asthma, and they instantly felt worse as the MVHR stopped. So that's also proving the impact of good air quality on people's health.
Yeah, I wonder if further down the line we'll almost get a hotline to someone who can come out within 24 hours to get it fixed. That's what I'm hoping anyway.
Wouldn't be nice. But as a community, this is where we need to go. You know, I was reading something about air source heat pump installation and the fact that there was a row of houses that had switched from boilers to air source heat pump, and one individual got really interested in it, and now he's advising all of his neighbor about how to tweak and just optimize air source heat pump. This is where we need to be. You know, maybe in the future we'll go to our neighbor and say, hey, can you just grab a couple of filters for me while you're out shopping or something, or place an order collectively or something. I don't know. I think as a community we need to also team up better.
How did you manage disruption on your project? That's one big, I would say, argument for doing it all in one hit, is you get it all out of the way. So you're phasing this. What does that mean for your lives?
Well, let's face it, we're both architects. Yeah. So we really wanted to do it, you know, project of our life and for our children and for the future. So I don't think we're going to do two. We need to still finish a few decorative elements of this one. But the approach that we took here was absolutely drastic, and there was no way we could have lived in the house. So we were living somewhere else when we bought the house, and the contractors came in and did works for 6 months, and then we moved in. We were able to do the facade while living in the property. I mean, that coincided with the school holiday, so it's good. So we were not here for 2 weeks, which enabled the contractors to do most of their dirty work. So that's great. So it's also timing, you know, when you do your retrofit is a good idea. But for most retrofits, you don't have to smash all your house, like inside of your house, like we did, to do a layout that's a bit more fluid and bring the lights, etc. Every house is a prototype, and you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, but I have many friends who've done their retrofit and stayed in their property the entire time. So it really depends on what house do you have. Can you insulate externally, which would be a lot less disruptive? Do you have to insulate internally? Can you do room by room so that you can move around the rooms as you're doing the works? So yeah, there's all sorts of approaches that can be considered.
And how are you heating your home?
We used to have a gas boiler linked to a wet system, a radiator system. And we realized that actually our heating demand was very low, especially after doing the windows and walls. And so we decided to take away all of our radiators, and we now have one electric radiator for the whole house. So it's about 1 meter by 500 high, and that is enough for the entire home throughout the winter.
Very nice. Now, I notice in here at the moment, we've, as you talked about, got a few bits to finish up, but are you going to leave some of the ductwork exposed? And maybe you could describe also some of the timber elements that you have?
All the ductwork is concealed wherever we could, except in the living room where we have one piece of exposed ductwork. We're definitely intending to leave it there, because actually it's quite useful when somebody like you comes in and I can just point out the duct.
It's definitely there.
And you can understand how their house works. It's a little bit, like the Pompidou Center. You kind of understand how the building works by looking at all the exposed ductwork. On the exposed joist in the ceiling, because we've lost 100 mil of floor-to-ceiling height in the ground floor because we insulated the ground floor, we decided to take away the suspended plasterboard ceiling and expose the floor joist to reinstate a little bit of that lost floor-to-ceiling height impression, I guess. Because we've done a roof extension, we're becoming the house is now a 3-level house, so we had to have a fire escape, and therefore we had to intermittent paint all the joist at the ceiling level. And we also had to, that was me insisting this, having 2 kids, install an acoustic floor on the first floor to be able to limit the sound coming from the first floor and kids stomping around
Elephants.
the house.
Have that in my house as well.
That's right. So we kept the existing floorboards, but we installed a cradle system on top with a floating floor and a new cork
That's
floor.
quite effective.
Super effective, and I would recommend it. And it was a lot of money at the time, but I knew that it would be my sanity.
We haven't really talked about the floor. I know I'm going around the houses here, but the floors are always a big job. So what's the build up there?
So for the ground floor, we took off the screed. So when we came in, there was tiles and then screed and then slab. So we took the tiles off and the screed off. We re-leveled the floor, installed a 100 mil of insulation, and then a micro screed, and then some floor tiles on top. So fairly standard. The nice thing with the floor tiles is that in the summer month, it's quite a lot of thermal mass, and it stays quite cool down here. And the tiles add this additional cool feel when you walk on it, and it's quite nice.
And no insulation between the terraces. There's no need for that.
The terraces are part, as we mentioned, each house is a prototype. And as we investigated this house, we realized that 2/3 of the party wall was a cavity wall and 1/3 was solid wall. So we had to sort of mix and match our approaches. So we insulated the cavity wall with blown rock wool inside. And the solid wall we had to insulate internally because we couldn't change the appearance outside, and that was in our neighbour's land anyway. So the wall here in front of us is insulated internally. This is cavity, and a further in front of the house, we also have internal wall insulation. The houses are staggered, so we have portions of external walls on both sides, front and rear. So it's always a little exercise of understanding your thermal line and making sure that you achieve the thermal performance at every single point along that line, and what is the best approach.
What's been the biggest challenge of the whole project?
Apart from financing it.
That may be the biggest challenge? Yeah, go on, that's something else.
I guess I'm working with a contractor who really understands what you're trying to achieve and making sure that they are on board with you. And we had the chance to work with a contractor that had done several projects with Pruitt Bisley, so my husband's practice. and we're already a little bit more clued up than most. But to some extent, it would have been interesting also to work with somebody more local, to be able to teach somebody else and inspire other people to do it. We've done it with a few people. So the people who built the facade actually were not the people from the beginning. So they've learned quite a lot in the process. But I think we as experts in the field, we also have a duty to try to disseminate our knowledge and empower others to do the same.
And having got to the end of this, okay, perhaps a little bit of tweaking still to do, is it what you're expecting? Is it just another project tick, or how has it changed life?
Oh, it's absolutely completely changed the way that we appreciate comfort. I mean, the thing with this house is when we come in, we concentrate on the activities in the house. We're not concentrating on is it cold or is it hot or is it smelly or whichever, because this is not relevant for us. We can just go about our lives and what's important and the relationship between people. That's really what matters. And that's taken away a huge burden that is unfortunately on a lot of people's mental during the winter month when they're not feeling comfortable in their own homes. So that's one thing. The other thing is also the success of this house in the summer month when it overheats and we have extreme temperatures. This house also stays cool. It acts like a thermos. So when you put hot air or you maintain the high temperatures in the winter, it retains that heat thanks to the efficiency of the MVHR, which recovers the heat all of the time at 90%. But in the summer, it works a little bit the same. So like a thermos, if you put ice cube in it, it will keep these ice cube for a long time. Well, if you keep some cool air in a passive house, and really importantly, you prevent the solar gain, which means shading your facades, that will enable you to keep that cool throughout the day. And then at night, you can night purge and bring some cool air again and start the next day. So the shading is definitely the biggest challenge of low energy retrofit. It's not necessarily something that had been thought about in the original house, but with our warming climate and increasing number of heat waves, we really need to have the solutions to keep people comfortable in the summer as well. And we've been able here to maintain 26 degrees in a heat wave of 42 degrees outside, which is a great success.
What shading methods are you using then? Because you do have a fair amount of glass on the east and west elevations, both of which can be problematic.
Yeah, so typically 1960s homes have these large bands of glazing, which is way too much glass for what you really need in terms of daylight internally. But we decided, for reasons that I mentioned earlier on, to keep the existing window ratio for the character of the area. So we didn't have any shading system that came with the house, and we couldn't really recess it in the fabric because it was all very tight, and we didn't want to surface mount a system either. So we decided to adopt a temporary approach where, in a case of a heat wave, we get out our bespoke, homemade sheets of fabric in which I put 4 eyelets in each corner, and with rubber bands I actually strap that sheet of fabric on the corner of each window, and in the heat wave that creates our shading. I admit it's a little bit DIY, but I can tell you one thing, it definitely works.
I've seen all sorts of things and I love it. It's a language of passive house a little bit, isn't it? To have these shading devices of all sorts. We ought to start tying up some loose ends, I think. First of all, any lessons, anything you do differently from your project?
So, I mean, a key lesson is I would encourage you to benefit from the Passive House Open Days and visit some properties and experience it for yourself. I know there is a few B&Bs that are also Passive House building or low energy building. It's when you experience the comfort of these homes that inspires you to want to have the same, especially in the winter months. In lessons learned, or what would have I done differently? Yeah, I'm not sure I would have done things drastically different. Our key objective was to feel comfortable, and that's what we are. Obviously, there's architectural elements that you might have said, oh, I wouldn't have put this duct here necessarily, or specify this type of floor tiles or whichever. But this is completely superficial in my mind. What's really the key outcome we were looking for is feeling comfortable.
And for the general public, how do you feel retrofit is on the radar? Do people understand what it is? Is it the wrong word? How are we doing compared to when you wrote the book in the first place?
Well, when I published the book originally in 2013, nobody understood what retrofit was, and I was definitely the odd one out, and people were a bit skeptical and just not really interested, to be honest with you. There was a close community of really passionate people, for sure, already at the time, but that was very close-knit. It wasn't really yet widespread in the industry. Now, I think people are more familiar with the term, but to some extent, what they're more familiar with is fuel poverty issues, comfort issues, and fortunately, the bad press of the failures in retrofits means that people are even more skeptical to some extent. But there is also a lot more success story out there in the press, and now you can see in Metro, in various newspapers, that you have case studies of passive house and low energy house and how you feel more comfortable. How can you lower your energy bills? This is obviously a key issue for a lot of people. And so when I say how much we pay here, which is pretty much, negligible on the scheme of things, people are, kind of wondering on earth do you get there? Obviously, you mentioned the disruption is a significant factor that prevents people on top of the financial capital investment that you need to put towards these retrofits. But nevertheless, when you're explaining that you can have a step-by-step approach, people are very interested to see what is it that they could do, where can they start? And I think it's empowering that first step is so important.
And finally, maybe for the person who's coming into this, the homeowner who's got the leaky house, just starting with limited knowledge, they'll get the book, obviously. Any other tips that might help them get a successful outcome?
Just talk to people, benefit from the now quite significant community of organizations that are trying to push for a retrofit. So reach out in your region, wherever you are, about who is doing retrofits. Go and talk to them. There's a National Retrofit Hub also, big shout out to them, who are doing a fantastic work in trying to disseminate the good word on retrofits and how feasible it is. So yes, I think it's always about talking to people who now live in retrofits also, and making sure that you understand how was your story, how did you make it happen, and learn from them.
Marion, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Get more in our show notes today, which you can find at houseplanninghelp.com/392. You can review the key points in our summary. We've got some photos so you can check out how Marion's home has transformed. Maybe you've got a comment or you'd like to ask a question. We always encourage you to get interactive on social media. We'll give you links to Marion as well, and a link to where you can buy Residential Retrofits, the second edition, houseplanninghelp.com/392. My call to action is to check out the Hub, and this is the membership community that we run alongside House Planning Help. One of the resources we have in there is the in-depth video case studies, and we love this because this is where we film through entire projects, a bit grand designs styly. And one of the ones that we did was in Oxford at Kimver. So this is a Victorian mid-terrace, which they brought up to the Enefit standard. Guy Hargreaves was the homeowner there and just let us in on all the action. So Marion was mentioning about the thermal line and how that's got to be continuous, and sometimes the strategy changes around the building. I've seen this all firsthand, so it's fascinating. You've got to make it all fit together and work. It's a holistic approach. You definitely see that in this case study. So get access by joining the Hub. We've also got courses in there that highlight various different parts of the process that you're going to have to go through, offering help. Maybe you want help of others who are on the path as well. Well, meet them in the forum or chat to me in office hour. It's all in the Hub. Find out more details at houseplanninghelp.com/join. That's it for today. Thank you so much for being there. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.